Attention, all curious minds, innovators, and trendsetters. It's time to pause, lean in, and get ready for an extraordinary journey as we dive deep into the fascinating realms of life, technology, entertainment, and business. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Brace yourselves, for the next thrilling episodes of Hipther Talks is about to take off. Counting down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we go.
Hi everyone, Zoltan here. We're back again with Hipther Talks. And this time we're sticking to a different topic, a topic we approached earlier last year. Actually, we started the year with a similar topic. It's about human resources. And I have the pleasure of having Lisa-Maree Blumenfeld with me. Hi, Lisa. Nice to have you here.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so guys, just bear with us. We're using a new recording setup. Hopefully everything will go smoothly. I'm sure that the audio version will come out great. Let's see if the video is our format. But yeah, we must try new things as well. So Lisa is a seasoned HR leader with over 25 years of experience. But of course, our tradition here at Hipther Talks is giving the opportunity for our guest to share a few words about themselves in their own words. So Lisa, tell our audience who they're dealing with today.
Sure. So I am based in the United States. I'm in California, and I run an HR consulting company. So I've run this for, almost nine years now. And what we do is we support startups and mid-sized companies with their HR support, so they don't need to use a headcount to hire someone full-time. But yeah, it's been really, really fun working with startups. Prior to this, I worked in a number of startups myself. I ran HR for companies like Lyft and Expa and Jaywire. So had a lot of fun doing that, but knew that startups at an earlier stage needed some HR support. And so decided to give this a go 9 years ago. And here we are.
All right. So yeah, it seems that everybody's helping startups nowadays.
We're trying.
Just recently shared that we are launching an initiative called the Future Makers, where we are giving 1 year support for press release publishing on our network for startups. They can publish up to 10 press releases. It's worth about 3,000 euros. So, Lisa, what inspired you to start Retain, and what problem were you most passionate about solving?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I said, I had worked in startups, but right before starting Retain, I got a chance to work in an accelerator. And so I was working with 20 to 30 companies at a time. Some of them were just an idea and didn't yet have employees. And then we were able to help grow them till they got, 10, 15 employees. And then they kind of graduated the program. And I ran all of HR and talent for all of these companies. And so being able to work with a number of different companies, products, teams, all of it at one time was so fun for me. And what I learned was that, a lot of founders kind of think that they don't need HR support until they get bigger, but they're so much more successful, and the risk is so much lessened if they're able to get that support really early. So I believe that there was a market for it. And so what I wanted to do is allow for founders to get that support early on just a fractional basis, so that their foundation was set up correctly. And hopefully every company runs into issues at some point, but hopefully that would be pushed out much farther than a startup that was trying to do it on their own.
All right. So some startups move fast. So what are the biggest HR challenges you see founders facing as they scale their teams?
Yeah, I think just both finding the right talent, like hiring the right people, how they figure out if they're the best fit for the team. Are they going to be able to fulfill the job that they're hired to do? And what happens if they don't, right? And so oftentimes companies hire someone who on paper looks awesome, but for whatever reason, it's just not a good fit. And so it's complex to try to part ways with employees in a way that's graceful and kind, but still protects both the employee and the company. And in some cases, that can be really, really expensive. So I think that's oftentimes what I'm hearing from founders, like keeping them up at night, is just the hiring and retention process with employees.
Yeah, tell me about it. As a co-founder myself, I'm dealing with this every week, and sometimes it's so crazy because we're in a period when we are hosting a conference in Prague in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah,
we really need somebody to help us on the social media aspects. And some planning with the sponsors. And the person we hired this year ditched us 2 weeks ago. So it's no time to hire somebody new and actually teach them. So we need to wait for the next conference. So yeah, it's crazy. But so building high performing teams is not a small effort. So what are the key ingredients to making it work in a high growth environment?
Yeah, I wish there was such an easy formula I could give that would work for everyone. I think really knowing, I always try to sit with founders and get them to really think about what their company is, what they're trying to achieve, and developing those core values as a company. Because again, just hiring people to do a job that you have listed, if they're not the right person for the job or the company as a fit, it can just be very chaotic and stressful and just cause a lot of churn for other people too. So I think really taking the time to be thoughtful in your approach of who you're hiring and why you're hiring them is the first thing. And then I think the second thing is really putting together kind of a comprehensive onboarding for them. So very early on, you're setting expectations and you're tracking those expectations and documenting them appropriately, so that, if it doesn't, we always hope that they work out and they succeed and they're great. But sometimes it doesn't, right? And so just making sure that all of those steps are not ignored can really seem annoying at the time, but so important in the long run if you ever do have to say, this just isn't working out. And then I think the third thing is really looking at your high performers, valuing them, figuring out how you can provide opportunity for them, and opening up those lines of communication so you really know what they're looking for, so you can help retain them in a meaningful way.
All right. So let's also talk about HR strategies and employee retention, because as your company name is titled Retain, you probably emphasize on scalable HR strategies. So what does that look like in practice for a startup growing maybe from, say, 20 to 200 employees?
Yeah. So there's a variety of different things that you would want to implement. One of those is obviously, as I mentioned before, really identifying high performers and making sure that we're providing opportunity for growth at all levels, but certainly for those that are giving back as much as they can. I think the other thing too that we see a lot happening is when companies want to high achievers, they oftentimes will promote them to be a manager without really talking to them to find out if that's even at all what they want to do, or because that's a very different job, and management of people is hard. And it can be pretty crappy sometimes. And so really making sure that we take the time to figure out a strategy for who could go into management, who really wants to go into management, and how are we providing those opportunities to test out the water prior to them becoming just a manager overnight, and setting those expectations for a job that they hadn't done before. So I really want to get into the training of people and really acknowledging the career path that the employee is looking for. Because if it's not really going the way that they're hoping, they can find it anywhere else, right? And so making sure that those pathways exist within your company is really important.
All right. So just so you guys know, I'm in Eastern Europe. It's 9 p.m. over here, and I'm recording a podcast, and I'm talking about employee retention as well, because that's a huge issue today. And Lisa, I just want maybe point out that here in this area of the world, it's very hard in terms of employees wanting better salaries that are mostly given in Western Europe. So there's a huge emigration from these countries to for basically higher paid roles. So, but things have changed in the past years, and things are picking up. Many are now considering work-life balance. So, like I said, and as you know, employee retention is a huge issue today. So, what are the biggest mistakes companies make that drive top talent away?
A lot of different mistakes. I think promoting to the wrong levels, promoting to the wrong positions, having expectations that are not aligned with the individual's like desires for their own career, I think is like one of the most obvious ones. I think another one is, and we see this a lot here, but companies that assume, and it kind of is the opposite of what you just said, but it's assume that if we just give them more money, then they'll stay here. But if you don't know what their core motivations are, right? For some people, it may be that they need more work-life balance, right? It may be that they need a more remote workplace versus being on site at a company. For some people, it's their benefits. Here in the United States, our benefits are very different than a lot of other places. And so that piece of it can be critical for an employee, is just making sure that they and their families are covered by healthcare. So there's a variety of different things, but I think as a founder, if you are making all of those assumptions by yourself, you're going to be missing some things. And so I think it's really important to pull employees in. Even something as simple as like a survey of just like, what are the things that are the most important to employees? And how can we see about providing as many of those things as we can, aligned with business need? So I think without doing that and with making those assumptions, you're going to miss things. And employees will find what they're looking for elsewhere.
Wow, it's very, very fun doing such podcasts. at least we can consider to do a cross parallel thing, because here you have, of course, health benefits are included in your salary package automatically because of the government says
right.
So here people are now looking at stuff like gym subscriptions, or maybe having access to some sports activities, stuff like that. So yeah, those types of benefits are included. Here the problem is the money most of times, not the benefits. So
and we've seen the opposite. We've seen people who are taking, like, have very high paying jobs, and they sometimes will leave for a lower paying job if it has some of these other things like more work-life balance or closer to home or what have you. So we just have different variables where we are. It's interesting.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting to hear. And I'm interested about what's one underrated HR strategy that startups should invest in early but often are overlooked.
I might be kind of biased in this, but I do run into a number of founders that really want their company to feel fun and without a lot of rules and, that kind of thing. But I think if you're able to get very, very clearly written policies, just so employees know this is what we do here, this is what we can do, and these are the things that we absolutely cannot do. Just having some of those guidelines fairly early can prevent risk later. What we've seen is a lot of, some founders that just don't want to do those things because they came from a very highly regulated, big company culture before. They don't want that again. What'll happen is some of those things that you can't have happen will happen in a company. And then you're left with, now you have to take potentially like disciplinary action, or in some horrible cases, like legal action, but you didn't have policies to protect the company. And so it can get very expensive. So what I try to do early is just say, like, let's just get some of these things mapped out early, set expectations early, and then we don't have to keep snowballing like more policy after policy after policy. People just kind of know what the appropriate dance space is. And if they go outside of that, at least there's like a documented process by which we will take action. So there's no surprises. I've just worked with a number of companies that have had to, unfortunately, spend quite a lot of money on trying to unravel things just because they didn't have appropriate policies. They didn't want to take those steps early.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's also talk about AI, of course, because AI is now transforming every industry. And we had at our conference, there were a couple of presentations about how AI was transforming the decisions in court based on video surveillance in prisons about who they're going to release. And it was very strange to see that the AI was biased because based on the data, most of the people in prison were of black color. So basically, it decided that he did not want to release them because of the higher numbers, which was a very biased decision by the AI. So let's hope in the human resources field there will not be any bias by AI, because we've seen it enter that sphere as well. So how do you see AI improving or maybe disrupting HR functions in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think you bringing up discrimination as a really important piece, because AI is only as good as the information put into it, right? Yeah. You're feeding the machine and the machine's just giving you what it can distill down. So I am concerned about things like discrimination, because you're right. That's a really good example. We've seen a number of different examples of AI being biased early and often. And so I think for me, there's some upside with AI, right? It's going to automate some of the tasks that kind of take us a long time. It's interesting to draft a communication plan and run it through ChatGPT and just have it be like better somehow. So some of those things are really helpful. Yeah. But I think what we're starting to see, and what I'm a little worried about, I think, on the HR side, is that when you think about employees, especially coming out of like this COVID time period where everyone was working remotely and kind of forgot a little bit about how to grow and develop that human connection, we're at like the most isolated point in history, right? And so if a company is trying to rely on AI to be, cool and at the forefront and automating everything, but if an employee has an issue and you send them to a chatbot or a robot or some sort of AI product, it's not going to make the employee feel very, very valued, right? Like, oh, this company is not even investing in me and my colleagues, so why would I stay here? And so we're starting to see more of that, where humans are craving that human connection and not quite sure how to build it. And I haven't seen a good example of how AI can help bridge that gap, given that it does totally remove that human element.
All right. So we must, of course, embrace the fact that some HR departments have a lot of things to do, and they do need sometimes automation. Of course, not sending replies to employees from a no-reply email address and stuff like that. But how can companies strike the right balance between automation and human connection?
Yeah, I think that so many employees are just being bombarded by different ways to automate. I don't know about where you are, but here in San Francisco, it's like every billboard is different AI product. So it's a constant, like I said, bombardment of AI tools and advertising and all of these things. And I think being able to say and acknowledge that every employee has unlimited tools, it feels like right now, to automate, but kind of breaking through that a little and creating space for people to not have to use that, to kind of create a forcing function for people to get together and share ideas and deal with life and things like that together, I think is where we're going to have to actually inject some of that the human element again, where it's starting to just get watered down constantly. But I do think, like I said, there's in many ways, AI has helped automate so many things that were tedious and didn't really move the needle for an individual feeling successful in their day-to-day. So being able to strip some of those things away and make it go faster and kind of take it off our plate, I think is going to allow the high achievers to innovate faster too, and kind of create their own career path for themselves based off of, how they can prove their worth outside of this automation.
All right. So it's not all loom and gloom for the AI-powered tools out there, right?
I don't think so, no.
So are there any AI-powered HR tools that you're excited about right now?
It's interesting because, when a few years ago, right, like tech was building for all these different industries, but not necessarily HR. And so we were kind of left with a very manual process and systems. But then all of a sudden it shifted, like people started to recognize that this was kind of an untapped place for technology. So then there was just a ton of different options that had come out just to up level HR. So just even being able to automate like the onboarding process and at least the steps, the paperwork, the payroll, all of those things, getting employees to be able to join a company faster, I think has been really great. So I do look forward to seeing how these tools can continue down that path and take some of those tedious processes away from HR or founders. I think that's going to be exciting. I have seen some that I'm not as excited about, where it's like an AI bot to do coaching. Like that's the piece that's worrisome to me. And I think in many ways, like growing up, you watched all the movies about the robots and like none of them ended well. Like none of them had a happy ending, right? So I want to make sure that the things that we are using and building are going to contribute on the positive side of things for employees.
Yeah, this chatbot thing is crazy.
I know.
All right. So you are also the co-founder of 11, right?
Yes, I am.
And you focus on leadership communication, as we know. Yeah. So why is this such a critical skill for founders and executives?
Yeah. Well, in my job working with all of these startups, especially during COVID, like we were doing thousands of exit interviews with people and just trying to better understand, if they weren't being laid off, if they were choosing on their own to leave, why are you leaving? And so many of those conversations were around people not having intentional conversations with their manager or anyone in leadership at the company. They just didn't feel like they were valued. And oftentimes they had these scheduled one-on-ones that they would go into this meeting and be like, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? All right, well, here's what I did today. Okay, cool. And then they would part ways. There was like nothing meaningful that was happening in those meetings. And so employees would leave because they just didn't feel valued. They didn't feel like anyone cared about their growth or progression. And so what we wanted to do is create this app that allows people to record what they're feeling and what they're going through, questions they have, whatever in the moment. So you could just like open your Watch app and record it. And then it's sent to whoever they're trying to send it to. In most cases, it would be like their manager or their direct report, but without the notifications, because so many of the tools we use, you're just pinged, right? And what that does is it elicits a response of like, I have to respond to this right away. And that's taken away the ability for people to really take the time to process the information that they're giving and like giving back something meaningful. And so we took away the notifications. Now you can hear the tone, you can understand like where this person's coming from. And then the next one-on-one, you can kind of go through those things. So it's now taking this time and making it meaningful. And our hope is that will help reduce turnover in companies, because it can be so expensive for companies to have a high level of turnover, especially when it's something as simple, I say, but it's obviously very complicated, but simple as communication.
All right, so let's talk about this.
Yeah,
because there are some communication mistakes that are done by leaders. Mm-hmm. the question is, how can they improve?
Yeah, one of my co-founders at 11, he always just says, stay curious. And it's such a good little phrase to remind myself even of, making the assumption of, what people mean or why they're bringing this to me and what they're looking for in terms of an answer, usually is wrong. And so taking the time to just ask a whole lot of questions, really kind of making sure you really understand where this person's coming from and how a decision has impacted them and what they really think we should do instead. Like asking those questions, taking the time to do that is oftentimes it doesn't take a ton of time, but it's so meaningful for the other person. And I think if a manager can do that, if a leader can do that and take the time to really have these intentional conversations, it can be the best investment a leader makes in their company.
All right. So basically just ask that question. Don't
ask the questions.
Think about what that could be or what's happening. Just ask.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So how has your own leadership style evolved over the years, and what lessons have shaped your approach?
That is a good question. I think, as a leader, you learn from other leaders that you've worked for or worked with, right? In many cases, some people try to do it by reading a ton of books. That has never really worked for me. But I think, for me, it's hiring the people that you actually want to spend time learning from and providing information to. Like, it's not just the people who can just do the job. I think in hiring and taking the time to hire, sometimes I take too long to hire. But, for me, it's just really, really investing in that process has evolved over time for me, and just giving myself the grace to say, you know what, I can't explain it. This one doesn't feel right. We're going to take a little bit more time, has benefited me as a leader over time, because I think then I better understand who's coming into the team, and can really kind of build from that foundation that I've created during that process. And I think too, I've learned a lot about asking way more questions. I think as a newer leader, a newer manager, there's so much pressure on doing it right. And oftentimes that comes with like having the right answer. I think as I've evolved as a leader, it's admitting that I don't have the answer. I'm bringing everyone together, and I've hired this group of people because I depend on their backgrounds and their intelligence and, experience to contribute to an answer, rather than me feeling like I need to provide it myself. And we get better answers that way.
All right. So I think this year, the season 4 of our podcast, 4th year, it's all about surprises. And I'm surprised that you are the first person in 4 years that hasn't come up with the book title to tell me I read this book. All right. Because I don't read books, and every time there's somebody on our podcast, I keep telling people I don't need to read books, because everyone who comes on our podcast says that I read this book and this is so good. This part is very motivational, but you're the first one in 4 years
really
that said that. All right. So it's good to know. So now let's circle back, because it's almost the beginning of the end of our podcast.
Yep.
Because during our intro, you mentioned that you worked at Lyft, Expa, and Blue Shield of California, right?
Yeah.
So
I've worked in a number of places like that. Yeah.
All right. So what are some of the biggest leadership lessons you've taken from these experiences?
Oh, gosh. Such a broad question. So here, Blue Shield of California is a really big company. It's a health insurance company. And so I would say that was a position where our team was kind of highly micromanaged, meaning like it was like a stand up at the beginning and at the end, talking about like how many calls you made, how many people you talked to. And I think what I learned from that, number one, is that is not a management style that I like to work under, but I certainly don't ever want to be that type of manager. And that was not indicative of the company. It was just happened to be the manager that I worked with. And I think that's really helpful. You know, when you're in a situation where you're working for someone who you're not happy, taking those learning lessons and figuring out like, what is it specifically that I don't like? And how can I make sure that I'm not going to be that person as I grow in my own career and manage. So I think that was a big one for me, is like being able to hire people and get out of their way, is definitely much more my approach. But I learned that from working for people who are the opposite. And so that has really kind of helped me. And I've seen like different versions of that as I've gone through my career, but I think that for me, just identifying the things that I've really liked in leaders and things that I just didn't like at all, and trying to find my own path and my own voice in that works for me based off of like, what I've liked in the past, what I've seen resonate, make people successful. It's all been kind of from my own experience like that.
Yeah, micromanagement is kind of a disease, right? It's something that we cannot escape sometimes.
Right. And the people that do it, oftentimes they have the best of intentions, but it can be really stifling. And so I don't want anyone working for me to feel like they can't have the ability to, be expressive and creative and come up with different things and not have to report in all the time with their day-to-day. Like that's just not at all what I hope to build in a culture.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have a manifesto at our company about this. Yeah, we ditched that idea a long time ago. Yeah. So every HR leader has war stories, right? So can you share a particularly challenging moment from your career and how you navigated it? Maybe someday you wanted to give up.
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of those in HR, not because I don't love what I do, but oftentimes we're brought into situations that are just really hard, really emotional situations, and it can be draining. I think that the great thing about what I do is that it has high highs and low lows, right? You can have an incredible thing happen in the morning, and then at night, like something kind of disastrous at another client. And so just being able to balance that sometimes can be the most healthy place, right? Because you kind of find a midpoint. I think the period of time that was hardest, and this is not going to be creative or something you haven't heard a million times, but I would say for me in particular, the industry got really hard during COVID, because there was a lot of change that was happening, a lot of process that was happening, and trying to get these very hands-on companies to be remote all of a sudden, and just like the kind of breakdown that happened with that. But most importantly, it was a lot of companies that were having to do a lot of layoffs and furloughs. And so to do a lot of those emotional calls, like back after back, just constantly, it can be really draining on a person. That a decision that I didn't necessarily make, but I'm having to convey is going to impact someone's livelihood. And, that not being able to kind of counterbalance that with something positive, that just wasn't a lot of positive that was happening during that time. So I think that was a time for me and for others that a lot of my peers just got out of the industry as a whole, because they just couldn't continue to be in that kind of negative headspace. And it continued for years. So I think that was kind of the hardest time. Thankfully, we've been out of that time for a little bit and been able to do more of the fun, positive hiring and, creating of programs and stuff like that again, which has been really fun. So, but yeah, that was a bit of a dark, draining time for sure.
All right. So that's a great war story. What's next for you this year?
Oh gosh. I am very fortunate that I get to, work with and, run Retain. We're excited that, especially here, United States, things have been a little strange, right? We have recently had an election that has caused some feelings. And so I think that has impacted the market, obviously, and that's impacted venture capitalists funding startups. And so thankfully, we're starting to see like a little bit of that venture capitalists start writing checks again to startups, and that increases our ability to work with more and more startups. So I'm excited to see that shift out of this time a little bit. That's one thing. And then, continuing to grow and build 11 and help leaders be able to have more meaningful conversations. I'm really excited to see where 11 goes as well. So there's a lot happening, and I just feel really fortunate to be part of both of them.
All right. So as a final question is about advices. So if you could give one piece of advice to founders trying to build a strong company culture, what would it be?
Yeah, I stick with this, and it's just like to give yourself grace, because it is hard. It's really, really hard to be a founder, and you're going to have those days where you're like, what the hell am I even doing right now? Am I doing anything right? And so I think just to being able to give yourself some grace and looking around and knowing that like none of these founders know what they're doing. Like none of us do. We're kind of making it up as we go and trying to make the most educated decisions, but there's going to be a lot of mistakes, and that can be some of the fun that comes into it. But it's, we all, I would say, at least like good founders, like we're all kind of kept up in the middle of the night and stressed about all kinds of things. So just giving yourself the grace and the headspace to just acknowledge it as growth, and like making sure that you have a really strong network of people that you feel comfortable reaching out to and just saying like, today was a crappy day, man. Like, here's what I did, and I wish I would have done it differently, just so those people can be like, oh yeah, no, I've done that too. Like deep breath, it's going to be fine. I think those are the things that I wish someone would have told me a little bit more early on. So I like to make sure I tell that to founders that I get to work with.
All right. So that was some very great advice. And to put it in the words of Seinfeld, just when he said that basically we're all just playing a game, moving our pieces around, don't know what we're doing. And
exactly
only
right.
the lawyers know what they're doing because they just read the rules of the game. So they know exactly what's going on in the world. So
yeah.
Lisa, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
And thank you for
you.
our audience. Hopefully this new recording style we did today will be successful. Lisa, have a wonderful day ahead, and let's stay in touch. Where can people find you?
Oh, yeah. People can email me at any time. I'm just Lisa, so Lisa, at retainhr.com.
All right. So that's pretty easy, guys. So we will definitely post this. Okay. So take good care, everyone. We will be back next week with more crazy stuff. Goodbye.
And that's a wrap for this section of Hipther Talks. Thank you for being a part of our journey today. Don't forget to tune in next week for more insights and discussions. Stay connected with us on Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. Until then, keep exploring and keep growing. We'll see you next time.